is up, everybody? This is the members only stream where we are talking about Prophet by Kahlil Gibran. We're talking about the first part of the book. I'm not going to really go through the intro. I'm going to give you guys a brief overview of what this book is about, and then we're going to get into the chapters, what he talks about in each chapter, and hopefully get to the bottom of what makes this work so great because it really is one of the best pieces of poetry I've ever read, and I'm sure you agree if you took the time to read the assignment. If you didn't and you're just watching this blind, it's all good all the same. But okay, the Prophets by Khalil Gibran, and very quickly the first chapter, the first what is it, 11? No, it's longer. Yeah, the first 10 pages is simply just the intro, just setting up the story, and it's a very I say story very loosely. It's not necessarily a story. There's not really a plot and end to it. The story is that there's this prophet and he's leaving his city, and before he goes, he is going to say goodbye one last time. And he's giving them advice before he goes and in has to face new challenges, has to go about the world in a different manner. And he's somewhat reluctant to leave. He's somewhat reluctant to leave the city that has taught him so many things, and it's a very bittersweet ending, but he realizes the necessity to go. He realizes that if he stays there, he'll remain the same person, and life is about facing challenges. Life is about change. And that's really the underlying theme to a lot of Gibran is that life is all about change, that without change there is no life, and it's our ability to accept these changes that opens us up to the beauty of life. Somewhat that idea of you can never step in the same river twice that Heraclitus said so well, and there's something so profound about this idea, and there's something so important about this idea that I really 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 try to reiterate it as much as I can. Unfortunately, people aren't listening, but it is what it is. Okay, so we're on page 11 in um my version. This version doesn't have any chapter breaks. It just has the different sort of you could see where it shifts, but this is the chapter. I think it's called On Love or whatever. Then said Almitra, speak to us of love. And he raised his head and looked upon the people, and there fell a stillness upon them. And with a great voice he said, when love beckons to you, follow him, though his ways are hard and steep, and when his wings enfold you, yield to him, though the sword hidden among his pinions may wound you. And again, it's this juxtaposition, it's this yin yang, it's this love is capable of being one of the greatest aspects of your life or one of the biggest sources of pain and suffering. And it's going with the flow. It's experiencing the highs, it's experiencing the lows that make it all the worthwhile. And when he speaks to you, believe in him, though his voice may shatter your dreams as the north wind lays waste to the garden. For even as love crowns you, so shall he crucify you. Even as he is for your growth, so he is for your pruning. Even as he ascends to your height and caresses your tenderest branches that quiver in the sun, so shall he descend to your roots and shake them in their clinging to the earth. Like sheaves of corn he gathers unto you himself. He threshes you to make you naked. He sifts you to free you from your husks. He grinds you to whiteness. He kneads you until you are pliant. And then he assigns you to his sacred fire that you must become sacred bread for God's sacred feast. All these things shall love do unto you that you may know the secrets of your heart and in the knowledge become a fragment of life's heart. But in your fear you would seek only love's peace and love's pleasure, then it is better for you that you cover your nakedness and pass out of love's threshing floor into this seasonless world where you shall laugh, but not all of your laughter, and weep, but not all of your tears. And really what Gibran's saying is to truly love is to experience loss all at the same time. And it's only when we can open ourselves up completely that we can experience the heights and the depths as well. And that there's a certain necessity for suffering. There's a certain necessity for pain. Actually, I'm not going to show it because I don't know what I can show. But Gibran has, in this version, Gibran has drawings. This one, it's not necessarily like graphic, but they are not. Um, are he takes creative license? Okay. Then Ultima spoke again, and again he just goes on and on about this idea of you must experience the heartbreaks of love to experience the heights of love. And really, what Gibran is saying is that you have to be open as an individual. You have to accept that person, faults and all. You can't ask that person to be something else. And this is really the underlying idea to what Gibran's writing about love. And this is why so many of us struggle with relationships. It's because we want that person to be something else. We see characteristics we like about that person, but we try to stamp out the other characteristics about them, and that's not love. That's wanting somebody to be something else, and you can't want somebody to be somebody else and be in a good relationship with them. The only way you're in a good relationship is if you give more than you take, and that's how both people have to be. And when you feel that way, when you do things without strings attached, that's a true relationship. That's a true experience of love, and I think that's something that it takes more work on yourself than most people are willing to admit, and that's another thing of why relationships fails because people, they'll go through an experience, they'll go through a relationship, they'll have a heartbreak, and instead of looking to what they did wrong, instead of looking to where they could have changed their approach, they instead look to that other person and say, well, if this person just did this, this, and this, then if this person just saw me in a better light, or if this person did this, like we would still, no, no, move on, accept it, understand it, and be able to adapt yourself because you're just as responsible as that other person. It doesn't matter what happens to you. If you keep ending up in the same situation, then there's something wrong about you. Do you really think it's all those 10 people that you failed with, or do you think it's yourself? Do you think there's an element of you that's leading to these downfalls and these pitfalls? Then Almitra spoke again, and what of marriage, master? And he answered, saying, you were born together, and together you shall be forevermore. You shall be together when the white wings of death scatter your days. You shall be together even in the silent memory of God. But let there be spaces in your togetherness, and let the winds of heavens dance between you. This is again, it's all about the yin yang. It's all about the give and take. When he says, "Let there be space between you," it's if you turn into the same people, then that relationship becomes dull. It becomes boring. Think of a magnet. Magnets attract because they have opposites, and it's this opposition. It's this push and pull. It's this idea that you don't always get along with this person. You don't always see eye to eye with this person, but it's those challenges and it's how you overcome those challenges that make the experience more beautiful. This is why I like kind of don't believe in the idea of soulmates because like when you think of soulmates, like I don't necessarily think of love as something that is just there. I think of something that's deepened every single day. And essentially this is what Gibran is speaking about is that you need to stay your same person. You can't start becoming somebody else in order to please this other person. You have to keep your individuality. And if you can keep your individuality and give that to somebody else and give that to somebody else without any strings attached again, then you're going to get the exact same thing in return. And really, the thing about loving another person is you have to love yourself first. You can't love yourself, you're not going to be able to love someone else. And I can't remember if Gibran says this. I'm not going to read every single page because if I do, I don't necessarily like want to because I feel like that's kind of like not you're not going to go read it yourself if I read everything. One, and two, I feel like we're going to get into details that are kind of unnecessary and details that we don't necessarily need to talk about, whereas I just want to talk about the bigger picture here. And there's always a time to go back and do a closer reading and evaluate every single line, but I want to talk about the bigger picture here. That's what I'm interested in. I'm sure you guys are interested in that as well because of if you like the stuff I do, then that's mostly what I do. And a woman who held a babe against her bosom said, speak to us of children. And he said, your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they not belong to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls. For their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backwards, tarries with yesterday. Beautiful, beautiful poetry right here. And I think this is a really important thing in what he's saying. And really, really what Gibran is saying here is that far too many parents try to make their children exactly like them. And the unfortunate reality is that your children are not exactly like you. So in trying to live up to your example, they'll always fall short. In trying to live up to their example, if even if you match that example, even if you exceed that example, you're still just a carbon copy. You're not your own individual, and to deny individuality, to me, is the greatest sin. To Emerson's the greatest sin. To Gibran, it's clearly the greatest sin, and it's we can guide our children, we can guide the people around us, but we can't force them to be like us. It's the same thing with relationships. You can't force that person to be somebody else. If you want that person to be somebody else, then be with somebody else. That's not how love works. That's not how these things work. And if you try to control these people, if you try to keep your children exactly the same, then you're only causing them issues. You're only gonna make them rebel against you. You're only gonna make them hate you with every fiber of their being. And it has to be much more of a nurturing. It has to be much more of a, you know what, I can tell them what they need to do. I can tell them all the lessons they need to be learned. But until they learn them themselves, they'll never listen. Think of how many times your parents told you something and you're like, what does this guy know? And then, years later you look back and you're like, yep, they were completely right, but I just wasn't willing to admit it, and it was something I had to experience for myself. Nobody could tell me this. I wasn't going to listen. And it's kind of that way of things. It's that we learn through experience the lessons that we needed to learn, and so shall the children, so shall the next generation. And it's when you take this approach, I think it's much more enlightening, and it's going to lead people to a much better existence versus just being that commandeering tiger mom, or I don't overbearing father. I don't know if that's as significant on the psyche of people as the overbearing mother is, but maybe it is. I don't know. But then a rich man said that it, then said a rich man. I don't know how I read that wrong. Speak to us of giving. And he answered, you give but little when you give your possessions. It is when you give of yourself that you will truly give. For what are your possessions but things you keep in guard for fear you may need them tomorrow? And tomorrow, what shall tomorrow bring to the overprudent dog bearing bones in the trackless sand as he follows the pilgrims to the holy city? And what Gibran is saying is to give physical things is not as important as giving your attention, as giving your time, as giving your love, as giving your support. And uh, he also takes this to the extent of like you should give without asking, or you should give without having to be asked. That's really the greatest sign of generosity. It's when you see somebody and you do it in spite of their pride, in spite of their inability to ask you for help, you help them all the same. It's really easy to give people help when they ask it. It's another to reach your hand out and pick that person up and put them back on their feet. And it's also this idea of like, how poor is your soul if all you have is money? I think this is what people think charity is, and I think people put like such a dollar amount on charity, and oh, I donated this amount of money to charity this year. That makes me a good person. It really doesn't. I think most charities are corrupt, and most charities are just sham organizations that just have a legal designation that they give money back, and it's just a Ponzi scheme to me. Um, but the people that really have helped me in life, they didn't really give me things. They inspired me. They brought my spirit up, and it's through those lessons, it's through those things that those people gave me that made all the difference in my life. To give me money is one thing, but to give me inspiration is a whole nother thing. And Gibran speaks to something so profound here, and to me, I feel like I really resonate with Gibran because he focuses so much on the eternal world versus this fleshly world. I guess we'll say, I can't think of a better way to describe it, but to Gibran, the things of this world really aren't important. To Gibran, the things of the spirit of the soul are so much more profound and should be sought at so much more of an intensity than worldly possessions. Then an old man, keeper of an inn, said, "Speak to us of eating and drinking." And he said, "Would that you could live on the fragrance of the earth, and like an air plant be sustained by light. But since you must kill to eat, and rob the newly born of its mother's milk, to quench your thirst, let it be an act of worship. Let your board stand an altar on which the pure and the innocent of forest and plain are sacrificed for that which is purer and still more innocent in man. When you kill a beast, say to him in your heart, by the same power that slays you, I too am slain, and I too shall be consumed. For this law that delivered you into my hand shall deliver me into a mightier hand. Your blood and my blood is naught but the sap that feeds the tree of heaven." I think this is a really interesting sentiment, and this is, if you know anything about more like, how do I say it? It's like Native Americans for sure. Native Americans, they have this whole think you use every part of the buffalo, that sort of idea of things, and it's you're using this animal for your sustenance. You're not using this animal because you want to make money off of it, or you want to do this, you want to do that. No, you're using it, and you're really respecting that animal and respecting every aspect of it, and not letting anything go to waste, because to let that animal go to waste means it died for nothing. That sort of sentiment of things. And what Gibran says here is extremely fascinating, because he's saying death and life are both part of a process of a devotional act to God, and in some way we are, uh, our bones, our blood, our flesh is going to be what drives the next generation of life, and somewhat reminiscent of what's his name, Spinoza's Ethics, where Spinoza says that all matter to a certain degree is the same, and if we really go down small enough, then all matter is the exact same chemical components. And almost like Emerson's Oversoul, where we're kind of part of this bigger game, we're kind of part of this bigger cycle, and it's just our turn. Then the plowman said, "Speak to us of work." And he answered, "Your work, you work that you may keep peace with the earth and the soul of the earth. For to be idle is to become a stranger unto the seasons, and to step out of life's procession that marches in majesty and proud submission towards the infinite. When you work, you are a flute through whose heart the whispering of hours turn to music." And I always you have been told that work is a curse and labor a misfortune, but I say to you that when you work, you fulfill a part of earth's furthest dream, assigned to you when that dream was born, and in keeping yourself with labor, you are in truth loving life. And if you sing through, though as angels, and love not the singing, you muffle man's ears to the voices of the day and the voices of the night. Okay, so I didn't read this whole chapter on work, but essentially what Gibran is saying is that all work is equal, and all work is servicing something above us all. Think about it this way, like you farm and you create food so that somebody else can, make shoes, and that this other person can make stones, and this other person can build houses, and this other person can tailor clothes, and we're all kind of giving to each other in a certain way. I know it's not really that way anymore, because the economy is just all smoke and mirrors, but think of it this way, in that you're serving something higher. You're serving the progression of man, and I guess most jobs have some sort of utility to them. Hopefully you can find the utility to them. I know it's a lot harder now, but Gibran says to work, and to enjoy work, and to work with passion is to build something better than ourselves, and that no work is above other work, which I guess in some ways I agree with, in other ways I don't. Then a woman said, "Speak to us of joy and sorrow." And he answered, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked." This is I misquoted. I'm realizing I paraphrased it, but I would oftentimes use a quote from Gibran. I guess I'm just summarizing one of his ideas, but every sorrow deepens your joy. maybe that was in another translation. I don't know if this was originally written in English or Lebanese or Arabic. I don't know which language he wrote this in. Um, but maybe it was just a different translation. Your joy is sorrow unmasked, and the self-same well from your laughter rises was often filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. And what Gibran is saying here is that there's a necessity for pain to make you understand happiness. Because how could you understand the good times if you didn't know what a bad time was? How could you appreciate things if every waking moment of your life was just a pure paradise? Because you would eventually be bored. It's the fact that we fail. It's the fact that we go wrong. It's the fact that we can be evil that makes being good righteous, makes being good a noble thing. And we need to start understanding this idea of things, and we need to start putting this into perspective because without this sort of understanding, then I feel like we fall victim to this woe is me mindset, you know. Right now I can tell you a billion things going wrong in my life, but I can also tell you a million things going right. I don't know why I used that example. I can tell you a billion things going wrong, and I can tell you a billion things going right. You know, just as many things are going right for me. It's just the perspective I'm taking. And it's understanding that. It's understanding that this too shall pass. There's that story of King Solomon getting the ring, and the ring says, this too shall pass. And the reason King Solomon got this ring is because he asked for something that would make a sad man happy and a happy man sad. And again, we come back to this recurring theme of the cycle of things, of the necessity of change, of the necessity to experience the good so that we can experience the bad as well. You're not going to learn the trials of life if you have everything handed to you. That is why God punishes Job, because without the punishment, Job won't understand how much he is blessed. And because he doesn't rebuke God through this process, because he endures everything and he endures it without renouncing God, because he does that, he is rewarded tenfold. And that is really one of the most eternal lessons that you need to learn. It's through our suffering that we experience the good times. If we didn't experience suffering, there would be no reason to live. There would be no reason to go about experiencing life. Then a woman said, oh wait, no, I already read that, sorry. Then a mason came forth and said, speak to us of houses. And he answered, build of your imaginings a bower in the wilderness ere you build a house within the city walls. For even as you have homecomings in your twilight, so has the wanderer in the ever distant and alone. Your house is your larger body. It grows in the sun and sleeps in the stillness of the night. And it is not dreamless. Does not your house dream and dreaming leave the city for grove or hilltop? And this is this section's kind of difficult to I'm not going to go through all of this because it's a lot of there's like 3 or 4 pages of poetry about this, but it's interesting what Gibran says about houses is because think of a house. You get home and you lock yourself away in it and you don't go out and experience more things. And he has an interesting line that your house was built by your ancestors, and to remain in the house of your ancestors is to remain with your ancestors versus going out to experience more. And there's something very interesting about this that how our homes kind of tie us to a certain location, our homes kind of tie us to a certain set of beliefs and a certain way of doing things. And again, I'd like to live my life in this idea that everything in moderation, even moderation. And that's a quote that my jujitsu coach gave me. He says his dad used to say it all the time, and I think that's really the perfect way to go about all of these ideas. Is that pick and choose when to listen to it, understand it, keep it as some sort of framework, but don't live by it because you gotta live by life. You gotta go with what life gives you. But at the same time, it's an extremely fascinating idea of things, and I think Jabron is taking it more in sort of the spiritual way of viewing it and sort of the mental way of viewing it instead of the physical, but there certainly is a physical aspect to it. And the Weaver said, speak to us of clothes. Essentially, this chapter, Gibran is talking about how we kind of hide ourselves from the immoral eyes and how we kind of cover ourselves up to hide what we are ashamed to show. And I don't know how much I agree with this one. I think there's certainly an argument that, people should be able to wear what they want and, but even that to a degree, I don't want to walk around and see your blubber and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's perfectly okay that the laws around clothes and what you can wear. I'm perfectly okay with not seeing certain people with less clothes, but there's certainly a more esoteric point here that if you are so underdeveloped or immature that you can't see somebody in their true form, then that's a you problem. That's not a me problem. But yeah. And a merchant said, "Speak to us of buying and selling." And he answered and said, "To you the earth yields her fruit, and you shall not want if you but know how to fill your hands. In exchanging gifts of the earth, that you shall find abundance and be satisfied. Yet unless the exchange be in love and kindly justice, it will but lead to some greed and others to hunger." And essentially, Gibran is saying that if you take more than you can use, then you're taking from somebody else's hand. And that's a fascinating idea, and I think that's certainly something in this. And I think this is like anything when it comes to resources, when it comes to institutions, that like the more they hoard things, the more they produce scarcity, the more power they have. And this is just kind of something that's been happening all throughout human existence. But what Gibran says in this chapter is that essentially the earth belongs to all of us, and in hoarding these resources and taking them away from other people, then we force people to not have enough. And I just love the way he says this through such simple words. No, I dropped my bookmark. Then one of the judges of the city stood forth and said, "Speak to us of crime and punishment." And he answered, saying, "It is when your spirit goes wandering upon the wind, that you alone and unguarded commit a wrong unto others, and therefore unto yourself. And for the wrong committed, must you knock and wait a while unheeded at the gates of the blessed." And you can, if you've read anything by Gibran, you can really guess what he's going to say here, because there's the whole idea of let he who hath no sin cast the first stone, and that's essentially what Gibran says in this chapter. And it's fascinating because I think so many people are so quick to judge others, but they're not quick to judge themselves. And I think if we reverse that, I think if we reversed what am I doing? How am I affecting the world? How am I being not so great of a person, and start to be more introspective and start to curtail your own behavior. I think it's a lot harder to see the world in such a bleak light, because once you can start gaining some sort of perspective, once you can start putting yourself into someone else's shoes, then it's a lot harder to condemn them. Because, I can look to a criminal, I can look to somebody that does something wrong, but I can also say, you know what, maybe I would have done the same thing. Maybe if given the same circumstances, maybe if I was out of my mind, maybe if I experienced everything they experienced, I too would be vicious. I too would be spurned by the world. I too would feel like the world was evil, and I some way need to enact evil back on it. And I think Gibran is perfectly capable of putting all these sort of, I wouldn't even say they're more esoteric, but like basic principles of Christianity into such a finely weaved and finely crafted poem. And yeah, we're gonna continue the second part of um the Prophet next week. This was a very fun thing to go through, and I really am having a whole new appreciation for this book, because not to say this isn't my favorite work from Gibran, but it's often seen as his masterpiece, and it's often like the only thing that people read by him, it seems like, because Barnes and Nobles doesn't have a whole lot of other stuff. You look up Kahlil Gibran online, and all you get is The Prophet, basically, and it's kind of difficult to get his other works. again, he died like 70 years ago. So like that's another thing. It's like he really wasn't that well known when he was alive, and well, he was, but only in certain circles, and really only for the profit. But he really does have a great catalog of other works, and like I said, we're gonna continue next week onto the second part of the Prophet. But yeah, we're gonna continue reading other things by Gibran, and yeah, this is really fun. I'm having like a really interesting experience rereading things that I really enjoyed the first time reading it, but you go back to these pieces and you see different angles of them. And really what I've been realizing in a lot of these works is the reason why these things spoke to me so much is that they said things that I didn't catch the first time that I've only begin to understand after much more introspection, after much more thought. And there's so many deeper layers to this. I saw this with Emerson, I saw this with Blake, I saw this with Gibran and Sand and Foam. Pretty much everyone that I've just enjoyed studying. When I've returned to them, I've had a whole new appreciation for them, and I've only fallen more in love with their writing. So yeah, we're gonna continue to do stuff like this. Eventually, we'll probably start reading stuff together that I haven't read yet. The only reason I'm doing it in this way because I feel like I can give a better presentation on it. I feel like I can plan it better and understand it better and answer questions if people have questions. Like let's say we're reading something and I haven't read it yet, and you finish the reading before me. You have a like, you know what I mean? I want to be more prepared, but that could also just be a cope, and that could also just be I don't know. There's a bunch of different schools of thought. There's bunch of different ways of doing this, and I'm just having fun doing this. So with that said, I'm gonna end this now because I'm starting to lose my voice. It's a lot harder to talk for a set amount of time without breaks than I remembered. And yeah, with that said, love you guys so much. Thank you guys so much. Peace out. Catch you next.